The council chamber was filled with laughter that echoed off the marble walls as the alien rulers looked down on the lone human standing in the center of the hall. To them, he was small and fragile, a creature born on a violent world, but nothing compared to the strength of their empire. His crime was simple. He had defied their orders, refused to kneel, and resisted when his colony was taken. They could have executed him quickly, but that was too easy. Instead, they chose something crueler. They decided to send him to die on a world where no prisoner had ever survived. The planet was known for one reason alone. It was the home of a monstrous beast that had killed countless warriors who dared to set foot there. The aliens thought it would be entertaining to see how long the human would last. Some whispered he would be gone within an hour. Others gave him a day at most. The human, whose name was Daniel, stood silently as the council pronounced his fate. His face was calm, his eyes steady. He did not beg, he did not cry, and he did not curse. That silence unsettled some of the younger council members, though they did not admit it aloud. To them, a human should have shown fear, but instead Daniel simply watched as if weighing them in his own mind. When the sentence was finished, guards dragged him through steel corridors toward the launch bay. A transport ship waited, engines humming, its course already set. He was thrown inside with no weapons, no food, and no protection. The guards laughed as they sealed the hatch. The journey was short. The ship descended into an atmosphere thick with storms, the sky burning red as the planet came into view. Great forests stretched for miles, broken by jagged cliffs and rivers of black water. Somewhere in that wilderness lived the beast the galaxy feared, a creature taller than buildings, with claws that shredded metal and eyes that glowed in the night. As the transport lowered, Daniel could feel the air shake with the roar of thunder. The door opened and he was pushed out into the mud. The ship rose and left him behind without a second glance. Daniel stood in the pouring rain, his clothes already soaked, his boots sinking into the soil. Around him the trees twisted upward, their bark covered in thorns, their leaves leaking poison into the air. The stench of rot filled his lungs, but he did not cover his mouth. He took a slow breath and began to walk. Survival was not new to him. Earth had taught him hunger, cold, and struggle. This planet was no different in his eyes, only larger and crueler. He knew the aliens were watching through hidden satellites, waiting for the first scream, but he would not give them the pleasure. As the hours passed, Daniel searched for shelter. He found a cave beneath a cliff, damp but dry enough to rest in. With stones and friction, he made a spark and coaxed it into fire. The warmth pushed back the shadows and gave him a moment of peace. Yet he knew he was not alone. The forest outside was alive with sounds. Insects the size of his hand scraped across the trees. Strange lizards hissed from the undergrowth, and far in the distance came a roar that made the earth tremble. That roar belonged to the beast, the one every prisoner before him had feared, the one the council believed would tear him apart before sunrise. Daniel sat by the fire, his eyes fixed on the dark opening of the cave. He was tired, his body sore, but inside his chest a strange calm grew. He whispered to himself that if this was where they sent him to die, then he would not die quietly. When morning came, the rain stopped. Daniel stepped out to see a sky painted with harsh orange light. He gathered branches for a spear and sharpened the tip on stone. He had no illusions. The beast was out there hunting, and it would find him sooner or later. But he was human, and humans had always faced predators larger, faster, and stronger. Humanity had survived by being clever, by refusing to give up. That stubbornness was in his blood. He carried the spear in his hand and began walking deeper into the wild. Every step left a mark in the mud, a trail that would soon draw the attention of the monster watching him from afar. The game had begun, though only one of them understood how different this hunt was about to be. Daniel moved through the forest with slow, careful steps, his eyes scanning every shadow and movement. The air was heavy with the smell of damp soil and strange flowers that looked beautiful, but oozed a thick liquid that hissed when it touched the ground. He remembered the lessons from Earth. That danger often came dressed in colors that tempted the eye, so he kept his distance. His spear was clutched in his hand, and his mind worked constantly, measuring every sound and every sign around him. This was not survival by brute strength, this was survival by focus and patience. He listened to the wind as it shifted, carrying with it the cries of animals he did not yet know. The flutter of wings too large to belong to birds, and always beneath it all, the faint echo of something heavier moving miles away, a rhythm that made the ground quiver. The galaxy called this creature the Beast, though none dared give it a true name. It was said to be the apex of apex predators, a monster that slaughtered armies and broke through armored walls with claws alone. Daniel knew it was out there, watching, waiting, learning his scent. He felt no illusions that he could escape it forever. His only chance was to adapt faster than it expected, to live long enough to find a way to turn the planet itself into his ally. He thought of the council laughing at him, imagining his body torn to pieces. That image fueled the fire inside him. They wanted a broken man, but they had dropped a human, and humans did not yield so easily. As the day stretched on, Daniel found water running through a stream black with minerals. It looked foul, but when he tested it with cloth and let it filter through stones, it became drinkable enough to quench his thirst. Hunger gnawed at him, so he studied the forest floor until he found tracks of a smaller creature, something with 6 legs and a hard shell. He followed the prints quietly, his muscles tense, and soon he saw it feeding on roots. With a swift thrust of his spear, he pinned it down. The creature screeched and thrashed, but Daniel struck again until it stopped moving. Its shell was thick, but he cracked it open on rock and roasted the meat over a small fire. The taste was bitter and rough, but it filled his stomach. For the first time since landing, he felt a spark of strength returning. That night, when the fire crackled inside the cave, the roar came again. Closer this time. The sound shook dust from the ceiling and made his bones rattle. He tightened his grip on the spear and waited. He knew the beast was not coming yet. It was toying with him, testing him, trying to break his nerves before the real hunt began. But Daniel had known fear before back on Earth, and he had learned to master it. He sat with his back against the stone wall, his eyes half closed, his breathing steady, showing no weakness even to the shadows. The stars above the cave mouth reminded him of home, and for a brief moment he let himself imagine the faces of those he had lost. That memory hardened his resolve. Morning came with silence, and silence was worse than roars. Daniel stepped outside and found the forest strangely empty. No insects hissed, no birds called. Even the lizards had gone to ground. The soil bore fresh marks, claw prints deep enough to crack stone, each wider than his chest. He knelt to study them, running his hand across the grooves. The beast had passed close during the night. Perhaps it had even circled his cave. He rose and adjusted his spear, knowing it would not be enough, but refusing to leave it behind. The prints led deeper into the forest, toward the cliffs that cut across the horizon. Daniel followed the path, but not blindly. He wove between trees, hiding his trail, doubling back to confuse whatever might be tracking him. Hours passed, and his body grew sore, but his mind sharpened with every step. He began to notice patterns in the world around him, the way certain vines curled always toward water, the way small creatures scattered seconds before a tremor in the earth. This planet was trying to kill him, but it was also offering lessons to those willing to watch. Daniel absorbed every one of them. By the time the sun lowered, he had reached the base of the cliffs. From above, shadows stretched long, and the wind howled through the cracks like voices whispering in the dark. Daniel searched until he found a narrow ledge that climbed upward. He tested each hold before trusting it, pulling himself higher with raw determination. Sweat burned his eyes, his arms trembled, but he climbed until he reached a shelf of stone wide enough to rest. From here he could see far across the forest. The endless green stretched like an ocean, and far in the distance something vast moved among the trees. He could not see it clearly, but he saw the treetops sway, entire trunks snapping as if struck by a storm. The beast was real, it was near, and it was larger than even the council's whispers had claimed. Night came again, and Daniel curled against the cliff wall, his spear across his knees. The sky was clearer here, the stars sharp and bright. He thought of Earth again, of how humans had once looked up at the sky and dreamed of touching those lights. Now he sat on a hostile world with no promise of rescue, no allies, only the certainty that a monster hunted him. Yet even with death so close, he felt something strange rise within him. Pride. Because he was still alive. Because he had not broken. Because somewhere deep inside he believed he could face the beast and not run. And if he could do that, then the aliens who had sentenced him would one day see more than a man with a spear. They would see the truth of humanity itself. Daniel woke with the first light of dawn painting the sky in shades of fire. His body was sore from the climb and his hands bled from the stone cuts. Yet he pushed himself upright and looked out over the vast forest below. The silence had returned, that heavy, unnatural stillness that told him the beast was moving again. Somewhere beneath the sea of green it stalked, and though he could not see it, he knew it was watching. The council had thought they were clever in sending him here, but they had never lived with the sound of predators outside their door. They had never walked the streets of Earth where danger wore 1,000 shapes. For Daniel, this was not the end. This was only another trial to endure. He descended the cliffs carefully, retracing his path, every sense alert. When he reached the ground, the prints were fresh again, deep scars in the mud that led toward the river valley. He followed them at a distance, not because he wanted to meet the beast unprepared, but because he needed to learn its habits. This was no different from hunting wolves in the mountains or tracking bears in the wilderness. To fight an enemy, one must first understand it, and Daniel's mind worked with cold focus as he studied the destruction left behind. Broken trees, crushed undergrowth, entire boulders shifted as though tossed aside by careless strength. He realized quickly that this creature did not only live here, it ruled here, and everything in the forest bent to its shadow. As the day grew hotter, Daniel moved along the riverbank and paused to drink. The water was cold and bitter, but it cleared his throat and steadied his mind. He crouched low, using the reeds as cover, and listened. At first he heard nothing, but then a ripple in the water carried a warning. The river swelled slightly, fish breaking the surface, and then all at once silence returned. He knew enough of predator behavior to understand what it meant. Something massive was near. He tightened his grip on the spear and crouched lower. The ground trembled first, a faint rhythm that grew heavier with each passing moment. Birds burst from the trees in a sudden cloud, screeching as they fled. Daniel froze and waited, his heart pounding but his face calm. Then he saw it at last. The beast emerged from the tree line like a mountain set in motion. Its body was covered in dark-scaled hide, each plate glistening like armor, its head crowned with horns curved like blades. The eyes glowed faint yellow, unblinking, locked on the river. It moved with the confidence of a creature that feared nothing, each step tearing into the ground. Daniel had never seen anything so massive, yet instead of terror, he felt a strange fire building inside. This was the enemy they thought would kill him. This was the doom they had promised, and here it stood in the flesh. The beast lowered its head and drank from the river, the water vanishing between its jagged teeth. Daniel stayed perfectly still, watching, memorizing the way it moved, the way its tail swept behind like a battering ram. The spear in his hand felt useless against such strength, but he did not let go. He understood that the fight would not be decided by weapons alone. It would be decided by will. When the beast finished drinking, it raised its head and sniffed the air. Daniel knew it had caught his scent. The monster turned slowly, its gaze falling toward the reeds. The glowing eyes narrowed, and for the first time, predator and prey met face to face. Daniel stepped forward, no longer hiding, and stood tall despite the weight of fear pressing against his chest. The beast loosed a rumble that shook the air, a sound that could have broken the courage of any other being. Daniel did not flinch. He lifted the spear and held it across his body, not in challenge but in defiance. The beast roared, a sound that echoed for miles, startling the forest into chaos. Smaller creatures ran in terror. The trees quivered as if bowing to the noise. Daniel stood firm, his voice silent but his stance unyielding. For long moments they stared at one another, man and monster, two survivors of worlds built on cruelty. Then unexpectedly the beast turned. With a final thunderous step, it moved back into the trees and vanished into the shadows. Daniel lowered the spear but did not relax. His mind raced. The beast could have ended him in seconds, yet it had not. Perhaps it was testing him. Perhaps it was curious, or perhaps for the first time in its life it had seen something that did not run. Whatever the reason, Daniel knew this was only the beginning. Their paths would cross again. The council thought this world would kill him, but they had no idea that by placing him here they had set the stage for something greater. That night Daniel returned to his cave and sat by the fire. The memory of the glowing eyes burned into his thoughts. He felt no shame in admitting the fear that had gripped him, but he also knew that fear was not weakness. Fear was fuel, and he would use it. He whispered to the flames that he would not die here, not by storm, not by poison, and not by the beast. If anything, he would rise from this world stronger than before. And when he faced the council again, he would bring with him proof of what humanity truly was. Days passed as Daniel moved deeper into the wilderness, his body growing leaner and harder with each trial. The memory of his first encounter with the beast never left him. The weight of its gaze pressed into his mind like a brand. He could not forget how it had chosen not to kill him, how it had turned away as though granting him a chance to prove himself. To others, that moment might have been mercy, but Daniel did not believe in mercy from predators. No, it had been a test, and he knew the beast would come again when the time was right. Until then, he had to prepare, and preparing meant not only surviving but adapting. He built traps from branches and vines, simple snares that caught the smaller creatures of the forest. The meat was foul, but it kept him alive. He sharpened more spears and even shaped crude knives from stone. With every fire he lit and every meal he roasted, he reminded himself that he was no prisoner waiting for death. He was a human fighting to bend this world to his will. He had been sent here as punishment, but in his heart he felt something different, as though fate had chosen him for a greater purpose. One evening, while gathering wood near the river, he heard the roar again, closer than before. The trees shuddered and birds fled in swarms. Daniel dropped the wood and lifted his spear, his pulse quickening. The beast appeared from the shadows, towering above, its scales glistening in the fading sunlight. This time it did not roar to frighten him. It simply watched, its massive head tilting slightly as if curious. Daniel stood his ground. His legs wanted to tremble, his instincts screamed to run, but he held firm. He raised the spear not to attack but to show that he was not prey. For long minutes they faced each other across the riverbank, neither moving. Then the beast lowered its head and stepped closer, the earth cracking under its weight. Daniel's grip tightened, but still he did not back away. When the beast's snout came within reach, it sniffed the air and rumbled deep in its chest. Daniel could feel the sound vibrating through his bones. He realized then that this was not a simple animal. There was intelligence behind those glowing eyes, a sharpness that mirrored the cunning of predators on Earth. Slowly, without lowering his guard, Daniel extended one hand. The beast huffed, its hot breath washing over him like a furnace. For a moment Daniel thought it would strike, but instead it drew back, let out a low growl, and returned to the trees. That night Daniel lay awake by the fire, thinking of what had happened. The beast could have ended his life with a single swipe, but again it had spared him. Not only that, but it had approached without striking. He remembered how dogs on Earth had tested humans before forming bonds, how wolves studied one another before joining a pack. Could it be that this monster, feared across the galaxy, was capable of something more than killing? The thought stayed with him until sleep finally claimed him. The next morning Daniel rose determined. If there was even a chance that this beast could be more than an enemy, he would find out. He followed its tracks, moving carefully, avoiding open spaces. For hours he trailed it through the forest until he reached a clearing where the ground was littered with bones. The beast was there, tearing apart the carcass of some other creature, its teeth slicing through flesh and armor like paper. Daniel watched from the trees, the sight filling him with both awe and dread. Yet even in its savagery he noticed something important. The beast ate methodically, never wasting, never killing more than it needed. This was not mindless destruction, it was survival, the same as his. On impulse, Daniel stepped into the clearing. The beast snapped its head toward him, growling, but Daniel raised his hand slowly, showing he carried no threat. He approached a few steps at a time, stopping whenever the growl deepened. When he was close enough, he picked up a broken branch and placed it on the ground between them, like an offering. The beast sniffed at it, then looked back at him unblinking. Daniel held the gaze, refusing to show weakness. Minutes stretched like hours until finally the beast turned away and continued eating. Daniel took that as a sign. He lowered himself onto a rock at the edge of the clearing and sat there, watching quietly as if he were part of the pack. For the rest of the day he remained, not speaking, not moving closer, just sharing the space. When night came, the beast left the carcass and vanished into the dark. Daniel returned to his cave, his heart pounding with triumph. He had not been attacked. More than that, he had been tolerated. To most it might have seemed small, but to him it was the beginning of something no one in the galaxy would have believed possible. In the days that followed, the pattern repeated. Daniel would track the beast, approach carefully, and sit at a distance. Each time the beast accepted his presence a little more. Once it even lay down while he was near, its massive chest rising and falling like a mountain breathing. Daniel could hardly believe it, but he knew deep down that a connection was forming, something ancient and unspoken. The council had sent him here to die, but instead he was learning to stand beside the very nightmare they feared. And as that bond grew, so too did his strength, for he realized he was no longer surviving alone. Something far greater was awakening between man and monster, And when the time came to return, the galaxy would never be the same again. Daniel had stopped counting the days since his arrival. The planet had no mercy. Its storms raged without warning, its forests twisted like mazes. Yet he had survived each trial. What gave him strength was not only his will, but the presence of the beast. At first their meetings had been rare and filled with tension. But now the giant creature appeared often, sometimes even approaching his camp at night to rest near the fire's glow. The council would never have imagined such a thing. To them, this monster was a terror beyond reason, yet here it was lying like a silent guardian at the edge of his cave. Daniel knew the bond was fragile, but it was real. He began to study the beast more closely. Its eyes followed him with a sharpness that mirrored his own. It learned his movements, the way he hunted, the way he built tools. Sometimes it even mimicked his actions, tilting its head when he sharpened a spear, sniffing the ground where he laid traps. He spoke aloud to it, though he knew it could not understand words. Still, his voice carried calmness, and the beast listened. One night a storm tore through the valley, the wind screaming and lightning splitting trees apart. Daniel's fire died and rain flooded the cave. He struggled to keep warm, his body shaking with cold. Through the chaos came a roar that cut through the storm itself. The beast appeared, its massive frame blocking the wind as it stood before the cave. With surprising care it lowered itself, curling slightly, shielding him from the fury outside. Daniel pressed his back to its scales, the heat of its body warming him. For hours they endured the storm together until the sky cleared. In that moment, Daniel no longer saw the beast as enemy or even as ally. He saw it as companion, bound by survival and trust. But survival alone was not enough. Deep inside, Daniel burned a greater purpose. He had been sent here to die, mocked by the alien council, cast aside as nothing. He refused to let that be the end of his story. He would return, not crawling in chains, but standing with proof that humanity could never be broken. For that he needed a plan. Escape from this world would not come by waiting. He began searching the wreckage left by prisoners before him, scraps of metal scattered in the forests, broken shuttles half swallowed by vines. Piece by piece he gathered what he could. The beast watched him, curious, sometimes even helping unintentionally by dragging trees aside or uncovering buried ruins with its claws. Daniel worked tirelessly, shaping scraps into tools, wiring fragments of power cells into crude batteries. He had no chance of building a true ship, but he did not need perfection. He needed something that could send a signal or carry him far enough to be seen. Each night he tested pieces by the fire, his hands burned and cut, yet his determination never faltered. The bond with the beast deepened during these long days. When Daniel hunted, the beast sometimes followed, scattering prey into his traps. When he ate, he left scraps by the fire, and the beast accepted them gently, its enormous jaws careful not to harm him. At times they moved side by side through the forest, man and monster, an impossible sight. Other predators fled before them, and for once Daniel felt not like a survivor but like a leader of something far greater. Still, he knew time was short. The council would not forget him. They likely believed him dead already, his bones scattered across the forest floor. The thought filled him with grim satisfaction. When he returned, their shock would be greater than anything they could imagine. Yet doubt haunted him as well. Could his signal reach beyond the storm-choked skies? Could he find a way to lift himself and the beast together? For he knew one thing with certainty: he would not leave without it. The creature had become more than survival. It had become part of his story, his proof that humanity's spirit could tame even the wildest fury. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, Daniel stood on the cliffs with the beast at his side. He held a shard of metal he had polished into a mirror, using it to signal toward the stars. Each flash was a cry for attention, a mark that somewhere a human still fought. The beast raised its head and roared, the sound echoing into the heavens like thunder. Together they called, man and monster, defying the silence of exile. That night Daniel whispered to the fire his final resolve. He would finish the device, he would find a way off this cursed world, and when he stood before the council again, he would not come as prisoner or victim. He would come as the man who returned with the beast at his side, living proof that no force in the galaxy could bend humanity to its knees. The wind carried his words into the forest, and the beast lay down beside him, its massive eye glowing softly in the dark. Daniel reached out and touched the rough scale near its jaw, a silent promise between them. The council had tried to bury him, but instead they had forged something stronger than fear. And soon, very soon, the galaxy would see it with their own eyes. Daniel worked without pause, his hands blistered and raw as he shaped the scraps he had gathered into something that resembled a craft. It was no ship by the standards of the galaxy, but it had a frame, a core powered by salvaged cells, and a rudimentary guidance system pieced together from fragments of ancient wrecks. To many it would look like junk, but to Daniel it was hope, a fragile bridge between this cursed world and the stars above. He was determined to finish it, and every spark of progress reminded him that survival was no longer enough. He wanted to return, to look into the eyes of the council that had mocked him and see their laughter die. The beast remained close through it all. It watched as Daniel built, sometimes nudging heavy parts with its massive snout, sometimes roaring into the sky as if challenging the storms themselves. Their bond had become undeniable, as natural as the fire Daniel lit each night. He no longer thought of it as the monster. He thought of it as his companion, the one creature in this galaxy that understood what it meant to endure. There were moments when he would catch himself speaking aloud, explaining his plans to it as if it were another soldier beside him. The beast would tilt its great head listening, and though it could not answer, Daniel felt as though it understood. The nights grew colder as storms thickened in the skies. Lightning split trees and thunder rolled like endless drums, but neither man nor beast faltered. Daniel scavenged deeper than ever before, finding twisted hulks of escape pods swallowed by the earth. From one he tore out a navigation unit, half rusted but still alive with faint energy. From another he salvaged a thruster cone, cracked but usable. Piece by piece his craft took shape. It was still far from flight, yet each addition made it more real. One morning, while testing a crude transmitter, Daniel heard the ground shake. He looked up to see the beast rushing through the forest, faster than he had ever seen it move. Behind it came a pack of smaller predators, lizard-like with jagged jaws, their numbers swarming like shadows. The beast roared and struck, crushing two under its claws, but more leapt from the trees, clawing and biting. Daniel did not hesitate. He grabbed his spear and ran forward. Together they fought, man and monster, the air filled with blood and fury. Daniel struck with precision, driving the spear through the eyes of one attacker, then ripping a blade from its fallen body to stab another. The beast crushed and tore, its power shaking the ground. When the last predator fell, Daniel stood drenched in sweat and blood, his chest heaving. The beast turned to him, its hide slashed and bleeding, and for the first time it lowered its head until it touched his shoulder. In that gesture, Daniel felt the truth. They were no longer hunter and hunted. They were partners. From then on, their bond deepened beyond survival. When Daniel hunted, the beast guarded him. When Daniel worked on the craft, the beast stood watch against the forest. Sometimes they rested side by side, the fire casting their shadows against the cliff walls. One small and one impossibly vast, yet both united in the same struggle. Daniel began to dream of their return, not as survivor alone, but as man and beast together. He imagined the council's faces when he walked into their chamber, the monster at his side, proof that humanity could forge bonds where others saw only fear. That vision drove him harder than hunger or cold ever could. At last, the craft was nearly complete. Its body was crude, patched with scars of metal and stone, but it had a working core and thrusters strong enough to pierce the sky. Daniel tested the transmitter again, this time sending pulses into the void. The signal was weak, but it was real, a cry that might reach passing ships. Hope surged within him, sharp and burning. He knew the time had come. Soon they would leave this world, and when they did, the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. That night, as the fire burned low, Daniel sat beside the beast and whispered the plan. He told it of the craft, of the stars, of the return to those who had cast him aside. The beast listened quietly, its glowing eyes reflecting the flames. When he finished, it gave a low rumble, almost gentle, and lay its head down near his feet. Daniel reached out, placing his hand on the warm scales, and in that silence he felt a bond stronger than words. He was no longer a man abandoned to die. He was a man with an ally, one forged in the heart of a death world. The stars above glimmered through breaks in the storm, and Daniel looked up with unshaken resolve. Tomorrow they would test the craft. Tomorrow they would rise. The council thought they had seen the end of him, but they had only created the beginning of something far greater. Together, he and the beast would return, not as victim and monster, but as legend. The dawn broke with a sky of burning red, the storms parting just enough to reveal the endless stars above. Daniel stood beside the craft, its patched frame trembling with the hum of power. For weeks he had labored, carving strength out of ruin, and now the moment had come. The beast stood nearby, its massive body calm yet alert, its glowing eyes fixed on the rising smoke of the engines. Daniel tightened the straps of his crude harness, his hands steady though his heart pounded with the weight of destiny. He had been sent here to die, forgotten by those who mocked his kind, yet now he stood ready to return not as broken prey, but as proof of what humanity could become. The engines screamed as Daniel activated the core. The ground shook, dust and leaves swirling into the air. The beast let out a low rumble but did not back away. Daniel climbed into the seat, gripping the controls with knuckles white from effort. He looked once more at his companion, the one who had shared his nights of fire and storms, the one who had stood beside him when death surrounded them. He gestured toward the open bay and the beast stepped inside, curling into the hollow space Daniel had prepared. The craft strained under the weight, but it held. Together they were ready. With a roar that echoed across the valley, the craft lifted from the ground. For a moment Daniel feared it would fail, but the thrusters steadied and slowly they rose above the trees. The forest stretched endlessly below and the cliffs fell away. The beast growled, unsettled by the motion, yet Daniel spoke calmly, his voice carrying the same steady tone he had used so many times before. The craft pierced the clouds, lightning flashing around them, winds tearing at the frame, but Daniel held the controls firm. At last they broke free into the open void, the stars shining sharp and clear. For the first time since his exile, Daniel breathed air that was not thick with poison. Hope surged like fire through his veins. The transmitter crackled, sending bursts of signal into the void. Hours passed, the silence of space pressing on them, until finally a voice answered. It was a merchant vessel, startled by the strange code. They guided Daniel toward docking, and when the craft latched onto the bay, silence fell among the crew. Out stepped a man, filthy and scarred yet alive, and behind him thundered the beast, its body filling the chamber with shadow. The merchants recoiled, weapons raised, but Daniel raised his hand and spoke. He told them the beast was no enemy, that it had saved him as much as he had saved it. His voice carried such weight, such calm certainty, that though their fear remained, they lowered their weapons. The tale spread quickly across channels. A whisper turned into a storm. By the time the craft reached the core worlds, the council was already waiting. Their chamber was filled with rulers, their laughter gone, their faces tight with disbelief. They had cast Daniel into exile, certain of his death, yet now he walked into their hall with the beast at his side. Each step of the monster shook the marble floor, its eyes burning like suns. The guards froze, their weapons useless against such power. Daniel strode forward, his scars a map of every trial, his presence stronger than ever. He stopped in the center of the chamber, the same place where they had mocked him, and raised his voice. He told them how they had underestimated humanity, how they had believed that fear and cruelty would break him. He spoke of the storms, the hunger, the predators, and of the bond that had formed between man and beast. He declared that humanity was not weak, that even in exile they would rise, that even when thrown into death they would find life. His words struck the hall like thunder. The counselors shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between him and the beast. Some whispered in fear, others in awe, but none could deny the truth standing before them. The beast roared, its voice shaking the walls, and every alien in the chamber flinched. Daniel did not smile, he did not gloat. He simply stood with the calm certainty of a man who had survived the impossible. He told them he had not come for vengeance but for proof. Proof that humanity could never be broken. Proof that even the deadliest monsters of the galaxy could become allies when faced with the unyielding will of man. His final words hung in the silence, a challenge and a promise both. When he turned to leave, the beast followed at his side. The guards did not move, the counselors did not speak. For the first time they truly feared humanity, not because of armies or fleets, but because of the strength carried by a single man. Daniel stepped into the light beyond the chamber, the beast's shadow stretching long behind him. Together they walked into legend, a story that would spread across every star, whispered in fear and awe alike. The council had sent a human to die, but what returned was not death. What returned was a bond, a defiance, and a reminder that humanity would always endure. And as Daniel vanished into the horizon with the beast at his side, The galaxy knew it had witnessed the birth of something far greater than fear. The galaxy never forgot the day the council chamber fell silent. Word spread faster than light across every star system, carried in whispers first and then shouted in fear. They had sent a single human into the jaws of death, expecting nothing but bones scattered in the soil. And instead he had returned with the very beast that haunted their legends. Where others saw an unstoppable monster, Daniel had seen something different. He had seen strength that could be met with strength, a will that could mirror his own. The counselors who had once laughed at his weakness could not meet his eyes now. They saw the scars on his body, the calm in his face, and the beast standing beside him like a loyal shadow. They saw proof that their cruelty had failed. In trying to destroy him, they had created something far more dangerous than they had ever feared. The beast no longer looked at them with hunger but with patience, its glowing eyes fixed only on the human it had chosen to follow. Daniel spoke to the galaxy with words that cut deeper than weapons. He told them that humanity would not be bent, that they could throw chains or storms or monsters at his kind, and still humans would rise. He said that humanity's greatest weapon was not ships or armies, but the stubborn fire in their hearts, the refusal to yield no matter the odds. His voice carried across every broadcast, a voice that even the proudest rulers could not ignore. When he finished, he did not ask for mercy, and he did not ask for power. He simply turned and walked away, the beast following close, its heavy steps echoing through the hall. No one tried to stop him. No one dared. For the first time in their long rule, the council felt what humans had always known: fear, but also respect. Across the stars, those who had dismissed Earth as fragile began to whisper new tales. They spoke of the man who returned from the death world, the man who tamed the untamable. Children on distant colonies repeated his story, their eyes wide with pride. Soldiers on forgotten fronts whispered his name, finding new courage. Even enemies of humanity paused, wondering what kind of species could turn nightmares into companions. Daniel did not seek their praise. He left the chamber with the beast at his side and vanished into the black sea of space. Where they went, no one could say. Some claimed he traveled to the edge of the galaxy to find a new home. Others said he trained the beast to guard the scattered human colonies, and some even believed he sought the hidden worlds where humanity's future lay waiting. Whatever the truth, the legend grew larger with every telling. The council never again dared to speak of humans as weak. They remembered the day silence fell, the day their greatest weapon had failed, and they trembled at the thought of what might happen if more humans followed Daniel's path. They had not broken him, and in failing they had shown the galaxy that humanity was unbreakable. And so the story of the man and the beast became more than survival. It became a warning, a symbol, and a fire that lit across every star. A single human had changed the balance of power, not with fleets, not with armies, but with courage, defiance, and the bond of trust no one believed possible. The end of exile had become the beginning of legend, and though Daniel's footsteps faded into the void, the echo of his return would never be forgotten. The end